Welcome, electronic video guests. Well, we're in a pretty good mood this weekend, and we just want to spend a few minutes talking about yesterday's Michigan-Ohio State football game, the game of the year. Both teams 11-0, battling for the Big Ten East Division title and a spot in the college football playoffs. I gotta tell you, I enjoyed this year's game even more than last year's game. This game was even more fun. I'll tell you why. Uh, we kept hearing from the Ohio State side that for 365 days we've lived with last year's defeat. We've dedicated every day to thinking about Michigan and preparing so this could never happen again. And they went out and played even worse than they did last year. You gotta love it. They spent all that time, telling everybody how it wasn't going to happen again. They spent $2 million to get a new fancy defensive coordinator. They were going to set everything back the way it should be. It didn't happen. But, it's the most interesting thing to me, though, is the reaction of the Ohio State fan. Because I saw many of them on the social media and on the sports talk shows and podcasts and all that. Well, Michigan might have won these two games, but we still have the better players. And for some reason, that gives them some kind of comfort. And we're going to out-recruit them again this year. Well, I don't know why that would give you any satisfaction. But I guess I can understand it in a way. I mean, let's face it. For almost 20 years, Ohio State kicked Michigan's ass. And so I guess you get used to a certain way of thinking that it's always going to be this way. But, and look. Ohio State might win the next 20 games. You don't know. That's the thing about sports. Each game is different. But Ohio State fans got to thinking that they're it's almost a given that they would beat Michigan. But the games had to be played every single year. You never know what's going to happen. And these last two games, Michigan's the one that did the ass kicking. In Ohio State, they've had to take their beating. But the idea from the Ohio State fans that we have the better players, I don't know how you make that argument. Their argument seems to be based on the fact that some nerd a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago rated some high school player a 5-star prospect and some other high school player a 3-star prospect. And because this nerd, so many months or years in the past, the way they tabulate it, this nerd says Ohio State has more 5-star prospects than Michigan. That means they have better players. That's not how the game of football is played. When you're out on the field, some nerd's opinion of what your players are doesn't matter. You got to go out and perform on the field. And if you actually look at the way the games have been played the last 2 years. I'm not talking about the previous almost 20 years when Ohio State was doing the butt kicking, but in the last 2 years when Michigan's doing the butt kicking, how can you say just because some nerd says you got a certain glamour boy here or there that you have better players? If you actually take a look at yesterday's game, in what area did Ohio State actually have any better players? There's only one area. Ohio State clearly has better wide receivers than Michigan. But what else? Is their offensive line any better? Was their quarterback any better? Their quarterback melted down along with the rest of the team in the last half of the fourth quarter. Made some horrible plays. Are their running backs any better? Is their defensive line any better? Are the linebackers any better? Are their defensive backs any better? Their defensive backs were terrible. If you could even see him on the field, you saw him half-heartedly chasing after Michigan players most of the second half. So, in one area, you can say Ohio State has better players, wide receiver. The rest of it, I don't know where the Buckeye fans think they can say they have better players just because some nerd says your players were so many stars and Michigan's players were so many stars. That's not how the game of football is played. It don't matter what the nerd says. You judge who's a good player by what they do on the field. And Michigan, clearly the last 2 years, has had the better players. Now, one other thing, I got to admit, I didn't think Michigan was going to win this game. All year it's been building up to this, and all year I thought Ohio State would win this ball game. I wasn't convinced Michigan's secondary could handle Ohio State's receivers, and they did a fantastic job yesterday. If you notice, for 3.5 quarters, Michigan had no pass rush. Stroud was just sitting back there with all day, nobody in his face. And that Michigan secondary held up against those receivers very, very well. They did an outstanding job. It was only when Ohio State quit, when their will was broken late in the fourth quarter, when Michigan was able to get a pass rush on them. But the Michigan secondary, they held their own against those Ohio State wide receivers, and I did not think that was going to happen. That surprised me. But I will say one more thing. Towards Thursday or Friday before the game, there was some interesting comments made by one of Ohio State's coaches that got me to thinking, you know what? I think Michigan's got a chance in this game. And it was this goofball Ohio coach, I think his name is Hartline. I saw something. He had some weird comments. He said something like, "We've been in the dark for the last 365 days. We've listened to them talk. We've listened to them insult our coach. We've listened to them say we weren't tough. We haven't talked. Well, Saturday, we're going to step out of the dark and show them who we are." And when I read that, I said, what the heck kind of weird goofball? What kind of weird gloomy goofball hocus pocus stuff is that? That's how the Ohio State's been thinking for a year. They might not be ready for this game. They sound like they're still traumatized. So that gave me a little hope. It was Thursday or Friday. Michigan might spank them again, and sure enough, they spanked them again. And I'll tell you one other thing, why you know that Ohio State does not have better players, because it is a fact that Michigan's players made Ohio State cry Saturday. And that's not me just exaggerating or poking fun at the Buckeyes. As you can see right there, Michigan made Ohio State cry. So you tell me which team has the better players. Is some nerd, because some nerd said this guy here is worth so many stars compared to Michigan's players. So that nerd's, in that nerd's opinion, Ohio State has a better team. If that's what you're basing it on, I'll go by the team that ain't crying at the end of the game. So those are my thoughts on the Michigan-Ohio State game. Michigan, for the second straight year, put a butt whipping on Ohio State. Ryan Day, Ryan Day for 365 days had been practicing his speech about, "I'm a real coach and we're a tough team," and he just could not wait to deliver that speech, because he knows what Harbaugh said about him, that he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. And they asked him about it in that press conference, and he said, "This is not the time to talk about it." He just could not wait to get to that post-game conference Saturday after he had beaten Michigan and just lay into Harbaugh. But you know what? Harbaugh proved once again that Ryan Day was indeed born on third base. He inherited an awesome football team from Urban Meyer. And as each year goes by, the Buckeyes get a little bit further and further from what Meyer had that program. Now, like I said, every year's different. They might turn around and win the next 20 again. Who knows? But for right now, Michigan's the top dog. Michigan's got the better players, despite what some nerd said about some player a month ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. Ohio State. Michigan made Ohio State cry, and Ryan Day had to keep his pie hole shut for another year. What a great day for the Michigan Wolverines. 45, Buckeyes 23. Let's hit the stop button on this video and dump this thing into the worldwide YouTube airfill.